Well, now that the dust is settling on the NSA's secret, or no longer secret, spying program, the legal questions are now twofold. First, Congress did sign off on the NSA's program, but Senator Rand Paul, who has consistently voted against these measures, wants to take this issue all the way to the Supreme Court to determine if our Fourth Amendment rights were violated. So, does he have a case? And second, the NSA whistleblower, Edward Snowden, is now basically missing after he reportedly checked out of his Hong Kong hotel room. He clearly chose Hong Kong for a reason, but has mentioned trying to seek asylum in Iceland, and now Russia is considering offering him protection. If Snowden is still in Hong Kong, then the situation gets interesting, because back in March, the Hong Kong High Court ruled that the autonomous city will not extradite anyone until a review of procedures regarding extradition applications. There's also questions about who will make the final call if he's going to be sent back to the U.S. Will it be Hong Kong, or will it be at Beijing? There are plenty of legal questions, so here to explain how all of this is going to play out is friend of the program, Jordan Sekulow, the executive director of the American Center for Law and Justice. How you doing, Jordan?
I'm good, Andrew. A lot going on.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm in agreement with Glenn Greenwald when he said that Congress can't defer authority to the White House and then presidents for all time can assume that power is theirs. He said it, presidents, something about defer power X or whatever. But sure. Is President Obama standing on firm legal ground with this program?
Well, it was interesting because we've been focusing on that analysis, the amount of change, and obviously just because legislation is extended doesn't mean how you implement it stays the same because of technology and the ability to access information is, PRISM developing, gathering data, sorting data, et cetera, and how you keep it. So there's that. And we know that now from the former head of the NSA under Bush, and then he became a CIA chief under President Obama, Michael Hayden, who said, the volume certainly changed and the authority of where the president relied on. So whereas President Bush, acting quickly, kind of post 9/11, was almost fundamentally relying on his Article 2 powers as commander-in-chief, what the president has done, which goes in line with how he has been throughout, is when these controversial programs, which he just bashed, now he's kind of thrown back and said, well, Congress has the authority, I sign it into law. But there's still a lot of executive power at play here, especially with the issues like PRISM. So firm legal ground, I think not. This is not just the Patriot Act provision 215, Section 215 at issue. This is now a specifics that we usually wouldn't have known about. The ACLU wouldn't know about. Now they do. And when you go to court on this, kind of like the IRS situation, you've got some proof. And so that will be tested. And that's why you can't just say, well, it's absolutely yes or no on this.
Are we confusing executive power with executive discretion? Because the president's always talking about prosecutorial discretion here, like with the Dreamers and stuff. What I'm amazed at with this program is it can track us down to our cell phones, but we can't find 11 to 20 million illegal immigrants. It didn't stop the Tsarnaev brothers. It didn't pick up that Lisa Jackson was using fake email aliases as a government administrator. It didn't stop the IRS in their communications, and no one stepped in and said, whoa, hold on a second here, you're violating some civil liberties here. So it seems like you have this big program and then the White House deciding who its target's going to be.
Right, and I think that is the danger here. The Patriot Act is supposed to be all about terrorism. And it was, put together very fast after 9/11, and it's been extended. There have been debates about it. Now, you can't really read the sections that they're relying on and say, well, it's absolutely clear that they were just collecting every one of our calls, person to person, domestically, you to me to you, without one of us being overseas. Overseas, they were pretty clear on that if you made a call overseas or send an email overseas, that's what they were intercepting to see if that related back to someone linked to terrorism. That itself was very controversial and being debated. This takes it to another level with PRISM and the fact that under the Patriot Act they're saying domestic to domestic, and they're keeping it all together in this way where a 29-year-old who hadn't been there very long, who's not even a government employee technically with Booz Allen, is able to access FISA court orders, a secret court that was established in the 1970s. That brings up a whole nother legal issue. You could support these kinds of laws, Andrew, like the Patriot Act, being used when they're appropriate. And there's been Bush administration officials who have said, now that we're over a decade past, the war on terror has changed, so they may not be appropriate anymore. It may be that could make it unconstitutional. But let's say you supported all of these laws. If they can't keep the data secure to where someone who is inside has that easy ability to access it and then abuse it, whether for political purposes, criminal purposes. I mean, they've got a lot of stuff on every one of us. We know that now. If a 29-year-old kid can do it, that alone could be a constitutional violation itself. And I think all Americans could say, you know what, you don't get this kind of power if you can't keep it safe, especially. And so that's a whole other issue here.
We know that our federal government's not afforded the writ of assistance or a general warrant. Warrants have to be specifically tailored. Now you have Rand Paul saying he wants to bring this to the Supreme Court. Is there how would he do that as a senator? How would Rand Paul bring this to the Supreme Court, and can he bring it to the Supreme Court?
You could certainly, as the ACLU and other groups have challenged the Patriot Act provisions as they stand. They could never really get access to what was going on because it's secret, but they just challenged the wording. Now they've also filed a lawsuit quickly. Private citizens would join in. Senator Paul can, of course, do that. You come together. You say, well, if you have a Verizon contract, and if we find out, which I expect we are going to, or you use Facebook, or you use Gmail, and you use the Internet, you could be a plaintiff here. It's not just a random harm to challenge at least the constitutionality, not like monetary damages, but we're talking about, is what the government doing constitutional or not? And if not, stop and or tailor it. And that is a key. And so this is why it becomes critical. The president keeps saying foreign terror, but the section leaves a window open for domestic to domestic, if possibly linked to foreign terror. So again, and we know the data's been exposed. There's a whole host of issues. I mean, first is the Fourth Amendment. There's a real argument here. There was a real argument over the Patriot Act. I mean, people disagreed. Some of it was partisan. Some of it was not. I think it's time for liberals. I see the ACLU doing it. That makes sense. If you're going to challenge the basics under Bush, you certainly should challenge the actual what's happening under the president, which is very offensive, I think, to the folks who have been attacked by the president for years for supporting these kind of measures in the law enforcement community. But end of the day, yes, it's a real legal challenge, but it's extremely complicated. Basically, all the evidence they've got to go on is what was leaked, which is still just a FISA court order on Verizon. So getting more, very difficult.
Now, here's another question. What if the Hong Kong High Court or the Chinese don't want to allow for extradition? What if he seeks asylum and receives it in Russia? The president might feel pretty stupid about that off-mic comment he made to Medvedev.
Sure, this becomes a very interesting, political game. Countries can have treaties and they can violate them. The U.S. and China, the U.S. and Hong Kong, we do have certain agreements, but we have a lot of Chinese dissidents here that China says should be sent back, and we've even snuck them out of the country. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but we've done it. So China could do that here, except for this individual. He's been very critical of China, and because China, the way it's set up with Hong Kong, which is not completely independent, but they can let them be when they want to, China doesn't have to get involved. And it may decide not worth it, on this one. But Hong Kong then has got to go through their system. But we have to do a lot more before we even talk about extradition. We have to file charges, the U.S. government, and then prove probable cause to HongOng. Now, I think they would work with America.
Isn't it true that some other countries, regardless of their treaties, refuse to turn over Americans if they're going to face the death penalty?
Sure. There are countries like that. I mean, the UK's is expressly set up that way. Most of the European countries are set up that way. And these treaties are all different. So you can't just say, well, the UK is about the best one with the US and vice versa. Hong Kong is actually very strong because of financial issues, a lot of transactions, a lot of people coming through. And they want, to protect what they are, which is this financial hub, they need real law enforcement. So China, it would be interesting if China thought that this was big enough to use as a pawn except for the fact that they'd be protecting someone who is claiming that the U.S. is bad like China. And,
I don't mean to cut you up. I got to leave it there. And by the way, as soon as he checked into a Hong Kong hotel room, the Chinese cyber operatives probably downloaded everything on his laptop. But I got to leave it there, Jordan. Thank you so much.
That's the other issue. Yeah. Is there someone else behind it, Andrew?
Yeah, we'll find out later. Hopefully. We'll have you back on the program real soon. Now.